300 years ago, a woman burned. Not quickly, not cleanly, not the way fire takes dry wood in open air with nothing to slow it down. She burned the way they wanted her to burn, slowly, carefully, in a chamber underground where no one above could hear what she said while it happened, where no moon could witness, where no wolf could feel it through the packlink and come running. They were thorough. They had been planning it long enough to be thorough. Her name was Kasha Vane. She was 26 years old. She had built something from nothing in these mountains, had taken a scattered, hunted people, and given them walls, given them law, given them a territory so fortified that 3 generations of enemies had broken themselves against it like water against stone. She had loved a man who was not built for softness and made him capable of it anyway. She had written the founding covenant in her own blood, because the elders told her that was the tradition, and she had not yet learned that traditions can be invented by people with reasons. She had not known, when she pressed her palm to the stone and let the covenant drink from her, that she was also feeding something else, something older, something that had been waiting beneath these mountains long before the first wolf found them. She learned it that night, in the chamber, while they watched. The woman who called herself Elder Vale, who had worn that name for 11 years by then, having worn 4 others before it across a century of careful disappearances and careful reappearances, stood at the back of the room and did not flinch. She had flinched once, a long time ago, before she understood that sentiment is simply power you have chosen to leave on the table. Kasha Vane looked at her at the end, not with hatred. Hatred would have been easier to carry out of that room. She looked at her with certainty. "This does not end here," she said. Her voice did not shake. That was the part Vale never stopped thinking about across 300 years of not aging and not forgetting, the absolute stillness in it. "You can erase my name. You cannot erase what I am. It will come back through my blood and it will know your face." Vale had her silenced before she could finish. Then she took what she had come for, the power source the covenant had been feeding since the night Kasha pressed her palm to the founding wall. And she walked out of the chamber, and she sealed it, and she had it filled with coal rubble from the upper tunnels. And she rewrote the founding record in the language only the Alpha line could read, and she built a law on top of the grave, and she called it sacred. She was very, very good at this. 300 years passed. The mountain kept its secret the way mountains do, not by hiding it, but by simply outlasting every person who went looking. Bloodlines scattered. Names changed. Children were told they were ordinary and believed it because children believe what they are told by people who love them, and the people who loved them believed it too by then, because fear is patient and patient fear eventually becomes fact. The Ashen Rift pack grew. It fortified. It survived border wars and famine winters and internal coups and the slow modern creep of a world that no longer had clean edges for things that should not exist. It became the most impenetrable wolf territory on the continent. It became a machine of survival so well designed that most of its wolves had forgotten the machine had ever had a different purpose. They had forgotten because the record told them to forget. The record was a lie. 26 years ago, in a house 40 miles from the Ashen Rift border, in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and old wood, and the particular warmth of a family that had built itself carefully and deliberately in the middle of an ordinary life. A woman gave birth to a daughter and wept from something other than pain. Her husband held her hand and said nothing because there was nothing to say. They had known this was coming. They had spent 3 years preparing for it and had not managed to prepare for it at all. The baby was small, dark-haired, quiet in the specific way that certain children are quiet, not because they have nothing inside them, but because what is inside them is too large for sound. The woman, whose name was Lena Crane, born Lena Vainkorath, the last name shed like a skin when she understood what it would cost her daughter if anyone found it, looked at her husband and said, "She can never know, not until she is ready, not until she is strong enough that knowing does not break her before she can use it." Her husband said, "How will we know when that is?" Lena looked at the baby. At the inside of her left wrist, where a faint gray spiral was already forming in the skin, barely visible, like something pressing through from the other side of a wall. "She will know," Lena said, We just have to keep her alive long enough. They spent 22 years doing exactly that. They were very careful. They were very loving. They built her an ordinary life with both hands and filled it with ordinary things and watched her grow into a person who laughed easily and trusted slowly and fought harder than anyone her size had a right to fight. And they told themselves every year that next year she would be ready. Next year they would tell her. Next year they would sit her down and explain what she came from and what it meant and why the mark on her wrist was not a birthmark and why fire had never once burned her and why sometimes when she was frightened the air around her hands went hot. They did not get to next year. 18 months ago, on a Tuesday in November, 2 people were taken from a kitchen table. A recorder left running on the counter caught 12 seconds of sound before it was found and destroyed. Those 12 seconds were not enough for the police. They were not enough for anyone official, anyone with authority, anyone whose help required explanation and evidence, and the kind of proof that exists in the same world as car accidents and closed case files. They were enough for one person. The daughter had not been home that night. She had been 40 minutes away, in a library, reading about pack law, following a thread she had found 3 months earlier in her father's locked desk drawer, a single sheet of paper with one word written on it in his handwriting. Duskmoor. She had not known what it meant then. She drove home and found the kitchen empty and the recorder on the floor, and she sat on the linoleum in the space between the table and the counter where she used to sit as a child, and she did not move for a very long time. When she stood up, something had changed in her face. Her neighbors would notice it later and not be able to name it. Her friends would call it grief and be half right. It was grief the way a wildfire is a fire, technically accurate and completely insufficient. She packed one bag. She took the recorder. She took the sheet of paper with the single word on it. She spent 6 months learning things her body already knew, and 3 months learning things her mind needed to catch up on, and the remaining time building a list of names that grew longer the further she followed the thread. She crossed the Ashen Rift border on a Thursday night in October, 18 months after the kitchen, carrying a hunting knife and a recorder and a list, and absolutely nothing left to lose. She did not know the mountain had been waiting for her. She did not know the mark on her wrist was a key. She did not know that somewhere below her feet, in a chamber sealed 300 years ago by a woman with borrowed time and a talent for erasure, the founding wall was breathing. She did not know any of it yet. Her name was Zivah Crane. She walked into the dark, and the dark knew her name. Chapter 1. The tree line ended, and Zivah kept walking. No hesitation, no pause to reconsider. 18 months of forward momentum did not stop for tree lines or border markers or the specific quality of silence that had been following her for the last 400 meters. The kind of silence that meant she was already being watched, and the watchers had not yet decided what to do about her. She counted her breaths, kept them even. The recorder sat against her ribs inside her jacket. The knife rode her left hip. The list lived in her head now. She had burned the paper copy 3 weeks ago, committed every name to the part of her mind that did not sleep. The first name on the list was Elder Vale. The compound entrance appeared as a rusted metal door set into a hillside. No signage, no light. A door that wanted to look abandoned and achieved it well enough to fool anyone who was not already looking. 2 wolves stepped out of the dark before she reached it. They did not reach for her. They did not speak. One moved left, one moved right, and the geometry of their positioning made the choice very clear. She went with them. The blindfold was black cloth, clean, smelling of cold dust, and something older she could not name. They tied it without roughness. That was somehow worse than roughness would have been. Underground, stairs, then a slope, then level ground. The air changed cooler, pressurized, carrying the particular weight of a lot of stone above a person's head. She counted steps, logged turns, built the map in the dark. 43 steps down. 2 left turns. 1 right. A door. They removed the blindfold. The room was stone. A table, 2 chairs, 1 light source set into the ceiling. No windows. No visible cameras, which meant the cameras were not visible. A man sat across the table. Zivah's left wrist went hot. Not warm, not the slow creep of circulation returning to a cold limb. Hot, a specific, located heat that started at the mark on the inside of her wrist and moved up her arm like something had been waiting to wake up and had chosen this exact moment. She pressed her wrist against her thigh. She sat down. She looked at him. He was looking back with eyes the color of deep river water, not blue, not gray, something that existed between those two things in a register that did not have a name. His forearms rested on the table. His left sleeve was pushed down. He was completely still in the way that certain predators are still, not resting, not relaxed. Coiled. Every muscle in a state of managed readiness that he wore like other men wore clothing. Something in her body recognized him before her mind could stop it. She recognized nothing. She had never seen this man before. She held his gaze and waited. He said, "Name." One word, the voice low, unhurried. A voice that had given orders for so long it no longer needed volume to carry weight. "Zivah Crane," she said. "Freelance journalist. I have credentials in my jacket pocket if your people didn't already find them." They found them. He did not look at the credentials on the table beside him. He looked at her. Why Duskmoor? Economic collapse story. 3 towns in this county have lost 40% of their population in 10 years. Duskmoor fits the pattern. The silence after that was not empty. It was full of something she could not identify. His assessment of her, maybe, or the distance between what she had said and what he knew she had not said. "You came at night," he said. "I have a deadline." His eyes moved to her left arm. One brief drop of attention, then back to her face. Her wrist burned harder. She kept her expression exactly where it was. He leaned back. The motion was minimal, 2 inches, no more, but it changed the geometry of the room entirely. Something shifted in the air. Whatever had been pressing forward in him eased back a fraction. "You'll be given a room," he said. "You'll stay in it." "I'm not under arrest." "No," he said. "You're under observation." He stood. The full height of him rearranged her spatial awareness of the room without her permission. She stayed seated, looked up without tilting her chin, a specific geometry of refusal she had practiced. He moved toward the door. "I didn't get your name," she said. He stopped, one beat of stillness. "No," he said, "you didn't." He walked out. The guard outside her room was young, broad, and trying very hard not to look like he was guarding her. He almost managed it. The room itself was stone, like everything else underground. A cot, a lamp, a vent in the upper corner of the wall that carried sound from somewhere below, muffled conversation, the scrape of chairs. She lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and pressed her left wrist against her sternum. The heat had not faded. She had experienced it twice before in her life. Once at 19, when a man grabbed her outside a parking garage, and something ignited in her palms that she could not explain and did not tell anyone about. Once during a nightmare 6 months ago, waking with her hands scorching the bedsheet and no memory of the dream. Both times she had filed it under adrenaline and moved forward. She could not file this under adrenaline. She closed her eyes, rebuilt the map of the compound from memory, counted the guards she had seen, estimated the ones she had not, located the ventilation access point in the upper corner and measured it against her shoulder width. 40 minutes later, a sound drifted up through the vent. Voices, 2 of them, one she did not know, one she did. She was off the cot and against the wall below the vent before the recognition had finished forming. Her hand found her jacket, found the recorder. She pressed record, held it toward the vent. The voice floated down clean and clear and cold, the way she remembered it, the specific cadence of it, unhurried, vaguely pleasant, the voice of someone who had never once in their life needed to raise it to be obeyed. Elder Vale. Zivah's hand was steady. Her breathing was even. The recorder captured 17 seconds before the voices moved away into silence. She played it back once. She pressed stop. Her hand was shaking. Not because of Vale. She knew exactly why her hand was shaking, and she pressed it flat against the stone wall and held it there until it stopped, and then she lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling and did not name it. Below her, somewhere in the compound, a door closed. She counted the silence after it. Somewhere in the same silence, she understood without understanding how, that he was not sleeping either. The mark on her wrist pulsed once. Steady, deliberate. Like a second heartbeat that had always been there, and had simply, finally, decided to make itself heard. Chapter 2. Morning came without sunlight. Underground, morning was a concept rather than an event. The lights in the corridor shifting from dim amber to a cooler white, the compound sounds changing register from the low night frequency of skeleton staff to the fuller, layered noise of a population moving through its day. Zivah had been awake for all of it. She had mapped the sound schedule by 4 a.m. She had measured the vent opening with her thumb and forefinger by 4:30. She had identified 3 possible routes out of the room by 5, assessed all 3 as survivable not ideal, and filed them in order of preference by 5:15. By 6, she had run out of useful things to do and was lying on the cot staring at the ceiling, her left wrist resting on her sternum, the heat in it now so familiar it had almost stopped being alarming. Almost. She pressed her thumb against the mark, held it there. The spiral under her skin was darker this morning. She was certain of it. Not dramatically, not visibly changed to anyone who did not know exactly what it had looked like yesterday, but darker the way bruises deepen overnight, working toward something. She put her sleeve down. She stood up. The guard who brought her food was different from the night guard. Younger, with a careful face that gave nothing away. He set the tray down and moved back to the door with the spatial awareness of someone who had been trained to always know where his exits were. She recognized the training. She had done the same training. Different teacher, same principal. "How long am I here?" she said. "Until the Alpha decides," he said. "When does the Alpha decide?" He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at the middle distance. "When he decides." He closed the door. She ate. She thought about the word Alpha and the way the guard had said it, not like a title, not like a rank, like a fact of nature. The way people said winter or stone. She thought about the man across the table last night. She stopped thinking about the man across the table last night. The vent delivered its first useful intelligence at 9:14. Not voices this time. A single voice. Male, unfamiliar, delivering what sounded like a security report, border patrol rotations, the Eastern Tunnel maintenance schedule, a reference to something called the deep access that carried enough weight in the speaker's tone to mark it as significant. She recorded 4 minutes of it. At 9:40, the voice changed. She was off the cot before she finished recognizing why. Not Vale this time. A second voice she did not know, older, male, deliberate. Then Vale's response. Then silence. Then Vale again in a register that was almost conversational, the specific pleasantness of someone discussing logistics. She pressed the recorder to the vent and held her breath. The words came through in fragments. The girl. A pause, not what she appears. Another pause longer. Then clearly, with no ambiguity, no possibility of mishearing. Handle it before the Alpha makes it complicated. Zivah lowered the recorder. She looked at the door. Handle it had a weight to it that she did not need to interpret. 18 months of following this thread had taught her exactly what that phrase meant when people like Vale used it. It was the same phrase, or a version of it, that had emptied her parents' kitchen on a Tuesday in November. She pressed stop. She put the recorder back inside her jacket. She sat on the edge of the cot and pressed her palms together between her knees and looked at the floor and thought, with the cold clarity that had replaced panic in her somewhere around month 3 of this, about her options. She had one recording that proved nothing to anyone outside this world. She had a mark on her wrist that she did not understand. She had a list of names, and the second name on that list had just used the phrase "handle it" with her name implied in the middle of it. And she had whatever had happened in that interrogation room last night. She was still deciding what category that fell into. He came at noon. Not the guard, not Corvin, whose name she had caught from the corridor twice this morning and filed. Him, Ravik Ashbourne, whose name she had also caught and also filed in a separate category behind a door she was keeping deliberately closed. He came in without knocking, which was technically his right since it was technically his compound, and he sat in the single chair and looked at her on the cot and said nothing. She said nothing. The silence between them had texture. She could feel the edge of it. His wrist was on the armrest, left wrist, sleeve down. "The council meets this afternoon," he said. "About me. About the situation. I'm the situation." He looked at her steadily. "Elder Vale has requested extended observation, 72 hours minimum." "On what grounds?" "Unverified threat classification." "I'm a journalist." "You're something," he said. The way he said it, not accusatory, not suspicious, something more careful than either, landed in the center of her chest and stayed there. "I haven't determined what yet." She held his gaze. "When you do, let me know." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. The ghost of a reaction controlled before it arrived. He stood. She stood too, without deciding to. Her body making a decision her mind had not authorized. They were 4 feet apart. The room was small. 4 feet in a small stone room underground with one light source and no windows was a different measurement than 4 feet in open air. Her wrist was burning. His eyes dropped to her arm. 1 second, back to her face. "The council decides your classification," he said. "Not me." "But you're the alpha." "Pack law operates above individual rank." A pause. "Even mine." He moved toward the door. "Ravik," she said. He stopped, his back to her. The name in her mouth had been a test. She had not decided to run it. It had run itself. His shoulders were very still. He did not turn around. "They're not going to classify me as a journalist," she said. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "No," he said, "they're not." He walked out. She waited until the corridor sounds told her the guard had settled back into position. Then she crossed to the vent and pressed her back against the wall beneath it and slid down until she was sitting on the cold floor. She turned the recorder over in her hands. 17 seconds from last night, 4 minutes this morning. The phrase "handle it" sitting in the middle of it like a stone in still water. She had enough to know what she was dealing with. She did not have enough to do anything about it. Not yet. Her wrist pulsed. She looked at it through her sleeve, the heat specific and located, that second heartbeat, steadier than before, more certain of itself. She thought about the 4 feet of distance in that room, the way he had stopped when she said his name, the way his shoulders had gone still, like a man who had been surprised by his own body's response and was deciding what to do about it. She understood that particular problem completely. She pressed her wrist against her collarbone. Below her, the compound moved through its afternoon. The council would be meeting. Her classification would be decided by people who already knew what she was and were afraid of it. She needed more time. She needed more intelligence. She needed the mark on her wrist to stop making her lose track of what she had come here to do. The light in the corridor shifted. Outside her door, the guard changed rotation. She did not move from the floor. She stayed there until the cold of the stone came up through her clothes and replaced the heat in her wrist, and she could think again in straight lines. It took longer than it should have. Chapter 3. The council chamber was 3 levels below her room. Zivah knew this because the sound traveled differently at 3 levels, compressed, arriving with the particular flatness of audio that had passed through too much stone to carry its original shape. She had been tracking the acoustic pattern since dawn. By the time the guard came to collect her at 2 in the afternoon, she had already mapped the chamber's approximate dimensions from the echo profile alone. She stood when the door opened. She did not wait to be told. The corridor to the chamber was lit by strips of low light set into the floor, practical, efficient, the infrastructure of people who had been underground long enough to stop pretending it was temporary. Other wolves moved through the space around her. They did not stare. They were too well trained for starring. But she felt the attention anyway, moving across her skin like pressure. Her wrist was quiet. She noted the absence the way she would note a sound dropping out of a recording. The chamber doors were iron, old, set into an arch of carved stone. The ash spiral symbols ran along the arch's edge. She caught them in her peripheral vision and filed them without looking directly, without giving anyone watching the satisfaction of seeing her react. The doors opened. 12 wolves sat in a curved arrangement of stone seats that rose in tiers on 3 sides. The 4th side held a single chair at floor level, the alpha's position, lower than the council, which she understood immediately as deliberate. Not submission. Visibility. The alpha sat where everyone could see him and he could see everyone. Ravik was already seated. He did not look at her when she entered. She did not look at him. Elder Vale sat in the highest central position. She was older looking than the voice had prepared Zivah for a face that had accumulated its years in visible layers, pale and composed, with eyes that were the washed-out blue of winter sky. She watched Zivah cross the floor with the specific attention of a person cataloging rather than observing. Beside her, Elder Thresh sat with the solidity of carved rock, broad, gray-haired, his hands folded on the stone ledge before him with a patience that had something waiting behind it. Zivah stood in the center of the chamber floor. She kept her hands still, her breathing even, her face the mask she had built over 18 months of practicing exactly this moment in exactly this quality of silence. Vale said, "State your name for the record." Zivah Crane. Occupation. Freelance journalist. A pause, not the pause of someone consulting notes. The pause of someone allowing a lie to sit in the room long enough for everyone present to register its weight. "You entered Ashen Rift territory at night," Vale said. "Without contact, without appointment, without the standard press inquiry that all journalists filing regional stories are required to submit. I work independently. Deadlines don't always." The deadline argument was used last night as well. Vale's tone did not change. Pleasant, unhurried, the voice of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. "We found it unconvincing then." Zivah said nothing. The silence was the correct answer. "You carry a recording device," Thresh said. His voice was lower than Vale's, with a roughness in it like stone dragged against stone. "Found in your jacket during intake processing. Standard equipment for a journalist. You carry a knife. Standard equipment for a woman traveling alone at night." Thresh looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes that was not quite anger, more considered than anger. Vale folded her hands. "We have a protocol for human intruders," she said. "It is straightforward, humane, and effective. The individual is processed, their recent memories of this location are addressed, and they are returned to the surface none the worse for the experience." The phrase memories are addressed arrived in Zivah's chest like something cold. She did not move. "However," Vale continued, "the protocol applies to accidental intrusions, individuals who wandered past our border through ignorance or misfortune." A pause. "You did not wander." "I was following a story." "You were following something." Vale's eyes held hers. "The question of what exactly is what concerns this council." Ravik had not spoken, had not moved. Zivah felt his stillness in her peripheral vision like a frequency she could not tune out. She looked at Vale. Vale looked back. She knows, Zivah thought, with the cold, flat certainty of recognizing a thing she had been afraid of. She has known since the moment they brought me in. "I'd like to request formal press status," Zivah said. "I'm prepared to sign any non-disclosure agreement your council requires." Thresh made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Vale said, "That will not be necessary." She turned to Ravik. "Alpha Ashbourne, the council requests your assessment of the threat classification." Ravik's eyes moved to Zivah for the first time since she had entered the room. 4 seconds of direct attention. She held it. Unverified, he said. Insufficient evidence for elevated classification. The council appreciates the assessment. Vale's tone did not flicker. However, given the irregular nature of the entry and certain observations made during intake, a pause, precisely weighted, the council is recommending extended hold pending full investigation. On what specific grounds? Ravik said. Potential intelligence risk. That requires a Tier 2 evidence threshold. You have her profession and her entry time. We have additional observations. Vale looked at him. Something moved between them, old, political, the weight of a dynamic that had been calibrated over years, which the council is not yet prepared to present on the record. The chamber was very quiet. Ravik's jaw held its line. His hands on the armrests were still. Completely still, the stillness of a man holding something in place through controlled force. Pack law required him to defer. Zivah could see it, the mechanism operating in real time, the alpha bound by the structure he was supposed to command. Extended hold, he said. 72 hours. The council recommends indefinite pending, Thresh said. Ravik looked at him, one long beat of silence. 72 hours, Ravik said, reviewed at interval. Vale inclined her head, the motion of someone accepting a concession they had already planned for. Zivah was dismissed with a word and a gesture, and no further acknowledgement of her presence. She turned and walked toward the chamber doors. 3 steps from the exit, footsteps fell in beside her. Even, unhurried. She did not turn her head. The footsteps slowed, matched her pace exactly. Then Vale's voice, at close range, quiet enough for only one set of ears. Your mother had the same eyes. A pause no longer than a breath. We believed we had finished that line. The doors opened. Zivah walked through them. She made it 14 steps down the corridor before her legs stopped cooperating. She put her back against the stone wall and pressed both palms flat against it, and stood there while the words reorganized everything she thought she understood about why she was here. Finished that line. Not silenced, not eliminated, finished. Like a task, like a project with a completion point. Her parents were not collateral. They were not discovered. They were the continuation of something deliberate that had started long before her mother was born. The guard stopped beside her. Are you? I'm fine, she said. Her voice came out level. She pushed off the wall and walked. Behind her, in the chamber, she heard Ravik's voice. Sharp, controlled, the specific register of a man asking a question he already knew would not be answered honestly. She did not stop walking. She needed to think. She needed the stone floor under her feet, and the recycled underground air in her lungs, and the recorder against her ribs, and the list in her head, and none of the other things that were currently trying to take up space in her chest. She walked back to her room. She sat on the floor. She held her left wrist in her right hand. The mark had come back to heat, not the burning of before, but something steadier. Something that felt, with a specificity she refused to examine, like it was responding to proximity, like a compass finding its orientation. She pressed her thumb over it and held it down. 14 steps down the corridor, the sound of the chamber doors opening and closing reached her. She did not count the footsteps that followed. She did not need to. Chapter 4. The archivist's name was Petra. Zivah learned this through the vent at 6:14 the following morning, a brief exchange between 2 wolves in the corridor below, referencing a records request that had come down from the Alpha's office at midnight. Unusual timing. Unusual priority level. The kind of request that made people in corridors speak in lowered voices and then stop speaking entirely when they remembered where they were. She filed the name. She filed the timing. She lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling and thought about midnight record requests and what a man like Ravik Ashbourne would need badly enough to pull an archivist at that hour. 2 levels below her, in a room that smelled of old paper and coal dust, and the particular dryness of documents that had been kept in controlled conditions for a very long time. Petra laid 3 bound volumes on a stone table and stepped back. Ravik did not look at her. "Leave," he said. She left. He stood over the volumes for a moment without touching them. The oldest was wrapped in treated leather gone dark with age, not black, not brown, something between the two that had no name in any color system made after the 19th century. The binding was hand-stitched. The stitching was intact. No one had opened this volume in his lifetime. He knew this because the Alphaline protocol for founding documents required a wax seal applied at each closing, and the seal on this volume bore his great-great-grandfather's mark. Unbroken. Which meant no Alpha since the 6th generation had found reason to open it, or had been told there was no reason, which was a different thing entirely. He broke the seal. He opened to the index. The founding documents were written in 2 languages simultaneously, the common tongue on the left page, the Alphaline language on the right. The Alphaline language was taught to each Alpha's firstborn at age 12. It was described in Pack tradition as a ceremonial dialect, a way of preserving the founding era's voice. He had accepted that explanation at 12. He was 29 now. He read the left page first. The Common Tongue Index listed what he expected: territorial boundaries, Pack law foundations, the Silence Covenant's establishment, the First Council formation, the names of the founding wolves. Standard historical record. The kind of document that had been summarized in Pack education materials for 300 years. He turned to the right page. He read the Alphaline Index. He stopped. Read it again. The founding Alphaline Index listed the same entries as the Common Tongue, with one addition. A single line, written in a different hand than the rest. Smaller, pressed into the margin as if added after the main text was complete. Vasari bloodline, transferred, scattered, record sealed by council vote. See Appendix 4. He turned to Appendix 4. The name Vasari appeared once in the Pack education materials he had been raised on. A footnote in the founding history, a minor allied family, lost in the territorial wars of the early settlement period. 3 lines, no elaboration. Appendix 4 was 47 pages. He read all of it. By the time he finished, the lamp on the table had burned through half its reservoir, and the compound above him had gone through its full evening cycle and into the early night quiet. He sat with the volume open on the table, and his hands flat on either side of it, and looked at the wall. The Vasari were not a minor allied family. Kasha Vane, Luna Kasha Vane, the founding Alpha's mate, the woman whose blood had activated the Pack's founding covenant and whose power had sustained the original territorial protections, had been born Kasha Vasari. The name had been changed at council request before the founding record was written. The reason given in Appendix 4, in the same marginal hand that had added the index note, was stated plainly. For the protection of the bloodline against those who would use it. The appendix detailed the bloodline's properties, the ashmark activation in non-wolf carriers, the thermal ability, documented, named, described with the specificity of someone who had witnessed it multiple times. The Pack-link resonance of Vasari Luna produced that differed from a standard mate bond in one specific way. It did not just connect 2 wolves. It reconnected the entire Pack to its founding frequency. The appendix's final entry was dated 14 years after the founding. The hand was shaking. The same marginal hand, now unsteady, the letters pressed harder than before as if the writer needed the physical effort to keep going. The bloodline has been driven underground by council action. I could not stop it. I have hidden what I could hide. If this record survives and a Vasari carrier reaches Ashen Rift territory, the Alpha who finds these words must understand. She is not a threat to the Pack. She is what the Pack was built to protect. The council that moved against her bloodline was not protecting Pack law. It was protecting itself. I am sorry I could not do more. R.A., Alpha Prime, 3rd generation. Ravik looked at the initials for a long time. R.A. Ravik Asborn. His great-great-grandfather's name. His name. He closed the volume. He sat in the silence for 60 seconds exactly. Then he stood, took the volume, and walked upstairs. He knocked. First time in 2 days. The knock landed in the room's silence like a stone, dropped in still water, and Zivah was off the cot, and on her feet before the second knock would have come. She opened the door herself. The guard had stepped back Ravik's instruction, delivered in the corridor a moment before, in a tone that did not invite discussion. He came in. He sat in the chair. He looked at her on her feet beside the cot and waited. She sat, not because he was waiting, because standing used energy she needed for whatever this was. He placed the volume on the cot between them. She looked at it, at the broken seal, at the age in the leather. She did not touch it. "Your surname," he said. "Crane." "Yes." "Where did it come from?" She looked at him. "My parents." "Before that?" The room was very quiet. "I don't know," she said, which was true, which was also the shape of a much larger truth she had been circling for 18 months without finding its center. "It was changed," he said. 300 years ago, anglicized across generations. The original name was Vasari." He paused. "Kasha Vasari, the founding Luna of Ashen Rift." The name landed somewhere below her sternum. She looked at the volume. She looked at his face. His expression was even, controlled, but his eyes held something that had not been there in the interrogation room 2 nights ago, something that looked, on a man who appeared to have systematically removed the capacity for it, like weight, the specific heaviness of a person carrying new information against old grief. "The council knows," she said. "Vale knows. She has known since before you crossed the border, I think." She said, Zivah stopped, rebuilt the sentence. "She told me they thought they had finished the line." His jaw tightened, one visible moment of it, then controlled back. "Your parents," he said. "Yes." The single word carried everything she did not say. He heard it. She saw him hear it, the slight change in his stillness, the quality of his attention shifting into something more careful. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, no elaboration, no performance of sympathy. She believed him. That was the thing that undid her composure more than any of it, not the founding Luna revelation, not the 300 years of deliberate erasure, not even her parents' names spoken in this context for the first time since she had spoken them herself. The thing that put a crack in the mask was the absence of anything extra in those 2 words. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm. "How much of the council knows?" she said. "Vale and Thresh at minimum, possibly 2 others. And you control none of them. Pack law gives the Elder Council independent authority on matters of bloodline classification." His voice was even. It was written that way deliberately. "By Vale." A pause. "I didn't know that until an hour ago," he said. She looked at the volume again, at the broken seal, at the cost of what it had taken him to open something that had been closed since his great-great-grandfather closed it. She reached out and touched the binding. The mark on her wrist went from heat to something else, a vibration, low and specific, like a tuning fork finding its note. Across the cot, his left hand moved. A single involuntary shift, the fingers spreading slightly against his thigh. Neither of them acknowledged it. "What does this mean for my classification?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "It means the council's interest in you has nothing to do with security risk. They want to finish what they started." He said nothing. The silence was the answer. She took her hand off the binding, sat back. "Tell me your parents' names," he said. She looked at him. His face was open in a way it had not been before. Not vulnerable, that was the wrong word for it. Present, like a man who had decided to stop managing the distance and simply sit in the room. "Lena," she said, "and Korath." He held the names carefully. "Lena and Korath Crane," he said. "Yes." His ash mark was visible at his wrist. She had not noticed him push the sleeve up. It was simply there, the spiral nearly black, the edges of it carrying a faint gold that had not been in it before. She looked at it for 1 second. She looked away. Outside the room, the compound moved through its night cycle. Below them, somewhere in the archive room, the lamp had probably burned out by now. "Ravik," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever you're deciding," she said, "decide it tonight." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood, took the volume, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Lock this after me," he said. She stood, crossed the room, reached past him and pressed the lock. Her hand was 6 inches from his arm. The mark on her wrist blazed. He walked out without looking back. She stood at the locked door and pressed her forehead against the cold stone beside it and breathed until the blazing settled back to burning, and the burning settled back to heat, and the heat settled back to that steady, insistent pulse. Like something counting down. Chapter 5. The assembly bell rang at 9 a.m. 3 deep tones through the compound's infrastructure, not electric, not digital, something older and resonant that traveled through the stone itself rather than the air above it. Zivah felt it in her feet before she heard it. She was already dressed. She had been dressed since 5. The guard who came for her was not her usual guard. 2 of them this time. Different posture, less the managed neutrality of routine duty, and more the specific blankness of wolves who had been given an order they had questions about and had decided not to ask them. She walked between them. The assembly hall was the largest space she had seen in the compound, a vaulted chamber carved from the mountain's core, the ceiling high enough to disappear into shadow, the walls bearing the ash spiral carvings in long continuous lines that ran from floor to vault without interruption. 340 wolves filled the tiered stone, seating on all sides. The floor was empty, except for 1 chair, positioned in the center. She did not sit in it. She stopped 3 feet from it and stood. The hall went quiet in stages, the way large groups go quiet when something is about to happen that everyone can feel and nobody wants to name first. Ravik stood at the front, alpha position elevated slightly, facing the assembly. His face was stone. His hands were at his sides. He had not looked at her since she entered. Elder Vale rose. She spoke for 11 minutes. Zivah counted them. The evidence was presented in 4 sections. Each section was documented, sourced, delivered with the unhurried precision of someone who had prepared this presentation long before this morning. The fabrication was so complete it had the texture of truth, cross-referenced, internally consistent, each piece supporting the next with the structural integrity of something built rather than invented. Section 1, Zivah's entry method, presented as deliberate infiltration rather than investigation. Section 2, her recording device, presented as surveillance equipment rather than journalist's tool. Section 3, her knowledge of the compound layout, presented as pre-briefed intelligence rather than the product of 48 hours of careful listening. Section 4, her bloodline. This was the section that changed the room's atmosphere. Vale presented the ash mark not as what Appendix 4 described it, a founding Luna's bloodline marker, a sign of legitimate pack heritage, but as a fabricated biological signature, a manipulation tool, something that had been, according to Vale's sources, engineered by enemy packs over a generation of selective breeding to produce a human carrier capable of triggering a false alpha bond. The hall absorbed this. Zivah watched it absorb it. Watched 340 wolves process the information through the filter of 300 years of pack history that had been written by the people standing at the front of this room. They believed it. Not all of them. She could see the fractures, wolves who shifted in their seats, who exchanged glances, who held themselves with the particular stillness of people suspending judgment. But enough of them, enough that the room's weight had moved. She looked at Ravik. He was looking at Vale. His jaw was a hard line. His hands had not moved from his sides. Pack law required him to hear the full elder testimony before responding. Vale had 11 minutes of it. She used every second. When Vale finished, she turned to Ravik with the courtesy of someone who had already won. "The Alpha may respond," she said. Ravik stepped forward. He opened his mouth. Thresh said, "Before the Alpha responds, the Council has one additional item of testimony." Ravik went still. Thresh rose. He did not use notes. He spoke from memory, in the flat tone of someone reciting rather than arguing. "Intelligence received from 3 independent sources in the past 72 hours suggests the individual known as Zivah Crane entered Ashen Rift territory as an operative. Her target, senior Ashen Rift leadership." A pause. "Specifically, the Elder Council." The hall did not make a sound. Thresh sat down. Vale looked at Ravik. "The Alpha may now respond." 340 wolves were looking at her. Zivah stood in the center of the assembly hall floor and felt the weight of that attention like a physical thing. Not hostile yet, not uniformly, but moving in that direction with the momentum of a crowd that had been given a clear narrative and was in the process of accepting it. She looked at Ravik. He was looking at the assembly. His expression had not changed. His hands had not moved. "Say something," she thought. One sentence, one word, anything. He said, "The Council's testimony is noted." 5 words. The hall breathed. "The Alpha's response," Vale said, "is that the Council requires a formal investigation period before classification is confirmed." His voice carried without effort. "Pack Law Section 9, Article 3. No individual may be permanently classified on elder testimony alone without Alpha countersigned evidence review." "Section 9 applies to Pack members," Thresh said, "not to external threats." "Section 9 applies to any individual held within Pack territory." Ravik's eyes moved across the assembly. "The law does not distinguish origin." A pause. "The Council accepts the Alpha's legal note," Vale said. Her tone had not changed. "We will schedule an evidence review." Another pause. "In the interim, the individual will be held at elevated security pending the outcome." She looked at Zivah. For the first time in 11 minutes of testimony about her, Vale looked directly at her. The winter sky eyes held something underneath their pleasantness. Not triumph, something older and more settled than triumph. Certainty. The certainty of someone who has done this before, who has run this exact sequence, build the narrative, use the law, let the crowd do the rest, and knows precisely how it ends. Zivah held her gaze. She did not look away. She did not look at Ravik. She made that choice consciously, in the moment, and understood it as necessary, because looking at him now, in front of 340 wolves who had just been told he was being manipulated by her, would cost him something she did not have the right to cost him. The guards came. She walked with them. She made it back to the room. She sat on the floor. Not the cot. The floor, the cold stone, specific and solid under her, real in the way that only physical discomfort is real when everything else has gone abstract. Engineered. The word sat in the center of her chest like a coal. Vale had stood in front of 340 wolves and described her, her bloodline, her mark, the thing on her wrist that had been there since birth, as manufactured. As a weapon someone else had built and aimed. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She had prepared for this compound, for the underground infrastructure, the guard rotations, the council structure, the names on her list. She had prepared for danger and hostility and the specific cold efficiency of people who had been erasing inconvenient things for a very long time. She had not prepared for a room full of strangers, deciding what she was while she stood in the center of it. She had not prepared for the particular quality of Ravik's silence. 5 words. The council's testimony is noted. She understood, with the part of her that ran analysis rather than feeling, that he had been outmaneuvered. That pack law had been used against him with surgical precision. That his 5 words had contained a legal countermove that protected her more than the assembly had understood. She understood all of it. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat on the stone floor. From somewhere above, Muffled through multiple levels of rock, she heard the assembly hall dispersing. The low frequency of 340 wolves returning to their day, carrying a story about her that would be settled into pack knowledge by nightfall. She sat with that. She sat with Vale's eyes. She sat with 5 words, and the specific quality of silence from a man who had the authority to say more. She had known he was bound. She had known it, and it had not mattered. That was the part she needed to excise, the part that expected something from him, the part that had been building, without her permission, across 4 days of burning wrists and midnight record requests and 2 words spoken without performance. She excised it. She rebuilt the mission around the space it left. She had one recording. She had the founding volume's contents, memorized in the 60 seconds she had held her hand on its binding. She had Elder Vale's voice saying, "Handle it." She had a mark on her wrist that 300 wolves now believed was fabricated. She had the list. It still had names on it. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm until the shaking stopped. The lock on her door engaged from the outside. Different mechanism than before, heavier, the sound of additional hardware. Elevated security. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She was still here. She was still whole. She was still. A sound at the door, not the lock, below the lock. The specific quiet of someone standing very still on the other side of a door, not knocking, not leaving. She looked at it. The compound sounds continued around the door like water around a stone. She counted. At 11 seconds, the footsteps moved away down the corridor. She looked at her left wrist. The mark was the darkest it had been. She covered it with her sleeve and lay down on the cot and stared at the ceiling and rebuilt the list from the beginning, name by name, until the shaking was completely gone, and the only thing left in her chest was the cold, clean weight of what she had come here to do. Chapter 6. The attack came at 2:17 a.m. Not an alarm. The compound did not use alarms, sound carried too far underground, gave too much information to anyone listening from outside the perimeter. Instead, the alert moved through the pack link like a frequency change. Every wolf in Ashen Rift felt it simultaneously in the base of their skull. Zivah felt it in her wrist. One sharp pulse, then the compound above her erupted into controlled movement. Boots on stone, orders delivered in clipped sequences, the specific percussion of a population that had rehearsed this. Her door lock disengaged. Not opened. Disengaged, the heavier mechanism releasing with a sound that was too deliberate to be mechanical failure and too quiet to be accident. She was on her feet. She looked at the door. Corvin, she thought, no evidence, certainty. She opened the door. The corridor was empty in both directions. Her guard was gone, pulled to the eastern tunnels, she understood, from the directional pattern of the boot sounds above. She stood in the doorway for 2 seconds. She went down. Not up, not toward the surface exit she had mapped on day 1. Down, toward the pull she had been feeling since the night they brought her in Blindfolded, the heat draw that lived below the compound's operational levels and had been getting stronger every hour she spent in this mountain. She had been ignoring it for 5 days. She stopped ignoring it. The lower corridors were unlit. The emergency power had been rerouted to the eastern tunnel defense line. She moved by touch and the faint phosphorescent strip of mineral in the stone walls, a blue-gray light that was barely light at all, but enough for someone who had spent 5 days cataloging every texture of this underground. 3 levels down. 4. The carved stone gave way to raw rock, older, rougher, the mountain's original surface before anyone had shaped it. The ash spiral symbols appeared on the walls, cut directly into the rock face with tools that left marks nothing like the compound's precision work. These were hand-cut, slow, each symbol pressed into the stone with the deliberateness of someone who needed it to last. The heat in her wrist was a continuous burn now. She pressed forward. The tunnel opened. The chamber was not large, perhaps 12 feet across, the ceiling following the natural arch of the rock above it. No lamp, no lighting strip, But it did not need them. The walls themselves held light. Every ash spiral symbol carved into this chamber carried a faint gold luminescence, not bright enough to read by, but enough to see the shape of the space, the age of it, the 300 years of sealed air that met her when she crossed the threshold. She stood in the entrance and looked at the walls. Every symbol was identical to the mark on her wrist. Not similar. Identical, same proportions, same specific curve in the second rotation of the spiral, the same asymmetry in the tail that she had always thought was a birthmark's randomness, and understood now was a signature. She crossed to the nearest wall and held her wrist against the carved stone. The mark blazed gold. Behind her, boots on rock. She turned. Ravik stood at the tunnel entrance. No jacket, he had come from the battle line. She understood from the state of his shirt, the dust on his forearms. He was breathing hard, not from the run, from something else. He looked at her wrist against the wall. He looked at her face. "Your wolf led you here," she said, not a question. His jaw tightened. Away from the perimeter breach, away from 300 wolves who need their alpha on the defense line. A pause. Here. She took her wrist off the wall. A sound from the upper tunnels, the deep reverberation of a cave system registering impact. The hollowed pack's assault was hitting the structural supports. The tunnel entrance behind Ravik collapsed. Not catastrophically, a controlled section, 3 feet of rock fall that sealed the entrance without bringing the ceiling down. The compound's structural integrity held, but the exit did not. Dust settled. Silence. They looked at the sealed entrance. They looked at the second exit on the far side of the chamber, also blocked. She saw now a rock fall that had preceded the assault by hours. Prepositioned. Someone had been in this tunnel before tonight. She filed that. Ravik crossed to the blocked entrance and put both hands against the fall, assessed it. She watched him calculate the weight, the composition, the time required versus the time they had. "The eastern wall is thinner," she said. He looked at her. "I mapped the acoustic profile from my room. The eastern wall of this chamber is 2 feet of rock versus 4 on the others. The resonance differential is." "How?" he said. "I counted echoes." A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more the specific recalibration of a man updating his assessment of a situation he thought he had already assessed correctly. "Eastern wall," he said. He moved to it. She moved with him. They worked in silence. He moved stone, the raw physical work, the pieces large enough that she watched muscles in his back and shoulders operate under his shirt in ways that she catalogued purely as structural information and nothing else. She directed, pointing to stress fractures, identifying load-bearing sections, reading the rock with the instinct that had been pulling her underground since she was a child, and that she now understood was not instinct at all. Above them, the assault continued. Muffled, distant, the compound absorbing it. 30 minutes in, Ravik stopped. He turned and looked at her in the gold light of the carved walls. "Your parents," he said. She did not answer. "What did they tell you about this?" He gestured the chamber, the walls, her wrist. "Nothing. Nothing. They kept me ordinary." She looked at the nearest spiral. "On purpose. I understand that now." He was quiet for a moment. "My great-great-grandfather's notes in Appendix 4, he said. He wrote that the bloodline was driven underground by council action. He wrote that he could not stop it. A pause. He was the alpha. He wrote that he was sorry. Ravik looked at her. "You read it." "In the 60 seconds I had my hand on the binding." She met his eyes. "I read quickly." The gold light moved across his face. In it, the hard architecture of his expression held something she had not seen before in direct light, not softness, nothing as simple as that. More like the particular quality of a face that has been holding something for a very long time and is considering, for the first time, the possibility of putting it down. She looked away. "They killed my parents to stop me reaching here," she said. "Yes." "And the Silence Covenant was written by Vale, not the moon goddess," not tradition. His voice was even. I found the secondary notation in Appendix 7 last night. Her original name is in it. She has been in this pack since before its founding, feeding on the power the Covenant drinks from your bloodline's activation. The chamber was very quiet. She's been alive for 300 years, Zivah said. Sustained by stolen power, yes. Zivah looked at the walls. At 300 years of her bloodline's signature carved into the oldest room in Ashen Rift, carved before Vale rewrote the record, before the names were changed, before the line was driven underground and told it was ordinary. She told the council I was engineered, Zivah said. Yes. She stood in front of your pack and... Yes. One word, the weight in it was considerable. She turned and looked at him directly. You said 5 words, she said. His eyes held hers. I said the words that kept you alive inside pack law. Without a Section 9 invocation, Thresh had grounds for immediate. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. 5 words were what the law gave me. She looked at him for a long moment. She believed him. Again, the same way she had believed his apology, the absence of anything extra in it, the cost visible underneath the surface. That was the problem with him. The cost was always visible. She turned back to the eastern wall. Help me with this section, she said. He moved beside her, close enough that his arm crossed her sightline when he reached for the upper stones, close enough that the heat from the wall and the heat from her wrist became indistinguishable. She focused on the rock. When this is done, he said, working the stone, Vale and Thresh, you came here for them. I came here for everyone on the list. How many names? 14. Vale and Thresh are 1 and 2. A pause. He moved a large section, set it down. I have Alpha-line access to every founding document she falsified, he said. Evidence the full pack would be required to accept under founding law. He looked at her. You have recordings and 18 months of external intelligence. Another pause. Together. We have everything, she said. He held her gaze. When this is over, she said, what happens to the bond? The gold light held them both. He opened his mouth. Closed it. He had no answer, and they both knew he had no answer, and the not answering was its own answer, the kind that lived in the body rather than language. She turned back to the wall. Help me with the lower section, she said. He did. Their hands reached the same stone at the same moment. Neither pulled back. They moved it together, the weight of it requiring both of them, her palms flat against the rock face, his hands beside hers, the mark on her wrist pressed between her palm and the stone blazing gold in the dark. Above them, the assault sounds were fading. The hollowed pack was retreating. She felt it in the walls before she heard it, the specific settling of a mountain that has absorbed an impact and is returning to its own frequency. The eastern wall gave. Not collapsed, opened, a section 3 feet wide revealing the access tunnel beyond. Cold air moved through it, compound air, recycled and familiar. She stepped back. He stepped back. They stood in the chamber entrance and she held up her left wrist and he held up his, and in the gold light of 300 years of her bloodline's signature, the 2 marks were the same temperature, the same depth, the same impossible color. Your elders murdered my parents, she said, to cover a murder they committed 300 years ago. Yes. Then we want the same thing. The gold light breathed around them. Neither moved. Neither looked away. His ashmark blazed. Hers answered. The mountain held them both and said nothing, and the silence was the loudest thing she had ever stood inside of. Chapter 7. The eastern wall held. Ravik went through first, protocol, not preference, the Alpha's body between the unknown and the person beside him before his mind had authorized the instinct. She followed without comment. The access tunnel was narrow, low-ceilinged, the kind of passage built for function rather than comfort. They moved in silence. Behind them, the chamber's gold light contracted as they left it, pulling back toward the walls, toward the carved spirals, toward 300 years of waiting. She felt it leave her wrist by degrees, not extinguishing, settling. Like something that had said what it needed to say. The compound hit them at the tunnel's end. Noise, movement, the particular controlled chaos of a population processing the aftermath of an assault. Wolves moved in organized streams. The injured were being directed toward the medical level. Reports were being delivered in clipped sequences to wolves with the bearing of command rank. 12 injured. She counted them as she moved through the corridor. 1 dead. She did not know his name. He was young. She saw him carried past on a stretcher, his face covered, someone's hand resting on the covering for 1 moment before they let go. The wolf who had let go stood in the corridor afterward with his back against the wall and his hands at his sides and nothing on his face. She looked away. Ravik had stopped beside her. He was looking at the covered stretcher. His expression had not changed, but something in the set of his shoulders had the weight distribution shifting in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with what it costs to be the person responsible for a room that now had 1 fewer person in it. He turned. Alpha mode engaged like a switch thrown, the full presence of it, the authority restructuring his entire bearing in the space of 1 breath. He moved into the corridor, and the corridor reorganized itself around him. Reports reached him. He processed them. He gave 3 orders in the time it took her to move to the wall and stay out of the way. She watched him work. The efficiency of it was absolute. No hesitation. No visible processing time between information received and decision made. 340 wolves, and every one of them knew where to direct their eyes when the situation became unclear. This is what the title cost him, she thought. The ability to simply stand in a corridor and grieve. She pressed her back against the wall. Corvin appeared at her shoulder. He looked at her for 1 moment, taking inventory. She understood, assessing damage, then looked forward. The entrance collapse, he said quietly. That wasn't the hollowed pack. She looked at him. Prepositioned rockfall, he said. Someone in this compound said it before the assault began. I know. He turned his head, looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were the dark amber of deep water with light coming from below, watchful, calibrated, the eyes of someone who had been paying attention for a very long time. You're not what Vale said you are, he said. No. What are you? She held his gaze. Ask your alpha. Corvin looked forward again. A pause. He went to the old tunnel, he said. During an active perimeter breach, his wolf pulled him off the defense line. Another pause. In 16 years of watching him, his wolf has never done anything without his authorization. She said nothing. That's not a question, Corvin said. I'm not asking you to explain it. He straightened off the wall. I'm telling you that I noticed. He moved away into the corridor. Ravik found her 20 minutes later. The compound had settled into its post-assault rhythm, the ordered grief of a population counting its losses and rebuilding its perimeter simultaneously. He came to her without being direct about it, the way he had been doing since the first night, arriving at her location through the natural movement of his duties, never crossing a room specifically for her. She had stopped pretending not to notice. He stopped beside her. Eastern tunnel is secure, he said. The breach was contained. 1 dead, she said. Emric, his voice was even. 22 years old, 3rd generation Ashen Rift. She held the name. He was quiet for a moment. The old chamber, he said. What happened to the wall? She looked at her hands, turned them over, palms up, unmarked, no evidence of anything. I pressed them against the stone, she said, and the wall opened. He looked at her hands. It wasn't the first time, she said. Something like it, twice before, both times I wrote it off. She paused. I can't write it off anymore. The appendix describes it, he said. Thermal displacement. The founding Luna used it too, he stopped, started again. It's not a weapon, it's a key, specifically calibrated to Ashen Rift's founding stone. She looked at her palms. Your wolf brought you to that chamber, she said. Yes. During an active assault. Yes. She closed her hands. Corvin noticed, she said. Corvin notices everything. A pause. He hasn't said anything. He will. I know. They stood in the corridor with the compound moving around them, and the particular quality of proximity that had been building since the interrogation room. Closer each time. The distance between them recalibrating downward in increments so small that each one was deniable, and the accumulation was not. I need to propose something, he said. She waited. The founding documents give me grounds to move against Vale and Thresh, but alpha-line evidence alone isn't sufficient. The Council controls the evidence review process. They can classify anything I present as fabricated. He paused. I need external corroboration, evidence sourced outside PAC infrastructure that a full assembly would be required to accept. My recordings, she said. And your 18 months of external intelligence. Combined with the founding documents, it's irrefutable. He looked at her. But I can't move until the case is complete. Vale has been building her position for 300 years. One incomplete move gives her the grounds to invoke emergency elder powers, and the whole mechanism becomes unreachable. How long? Days, a week at most. A pause. I need you to work with me. Inside the compound, off the official record, outside Vale's line of sight. She looked at him. You're asking me to stay. I'm asking you to finish what you came here to do. His eyes held hers. With support. She breathed in. When it's done, she said, what happens to me, to the bond? The corridor was loud around them, the compound noise filling every space. He said nothing. She waited. He said nothing. She had her answer. All right, she said. Something in him released, minimal, a fraction, visible only because she had been watching him with sufficient attention for 5 days to know what his baseline looked like. She looked at her hands again. One condition, she said. He waited. You tell me what the bond inversion means, the silence covenant, all of it. She looked up. I read the appendix. I need to hear it from you. His jaw held its line. If you kill an elder, he said, while bonded to me, the covenant inverts. Every protective instinct becomes its opposite. A pause. I would be compelled to destroy you. The corridor moved around them. Compelled, she said. Supernaturally, yes. She held that. And if I'm dead, she said, the PAC's founding protections. Collapse. His voice was very even. Every territorial protection built on the founding covenant dissolves. Every enemy we have made in 300 years walks through the border unchallenged. She breathed. So claiming the bond, she said, isn't just personally dangerous. No. It's 340 lives. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. Neither of them moved. She said, then we need to make sure neither of us has to choose. They worked through the night. His quarters, not her room, not a neutral space. His quarters, the decision made without discussion. Corvin diverting the corridor guard with the practiced ease of someone who had been running interference for this alpha for a long time. The founding documents spread across the stone table. Her recordings transferred to a format the PAC's archive system could authenticate. 18 months of external intelligence cross-referenced against 300 years of falsified internal record. They did not sit on the same side of the table. They passed documents across it. Their hands did not touch. The mark on her wrist held its gold. His matched it. Neither acknowledged it. At 3 a.m., he looked up from the appendix and found her looking at him. She looked back down immediately. 1 second of eye contact, maximum. His hand on the table was very still. At 4:15, she found a notation in the external intelligence, a transaction record, 18 months old, cross-referencing a financial instrument used to close her parents' investigation. The instrument traced back to a shell entity. The shell entity traced back, through 4 layers of corporate structure, to a real estate holding registered to a name she did not recognize. She pushed it across the table. He looked at it. Something happened in his face. "Ravik," she said. He looked up. "You know that name," she said. "It's Vale's original name," he said, "from the Appendix 7 notation." A pause. "The one she used before she killed the founding Luna and took her power." Zivah looked at the document. 300 years. The same person. The same method: erase the bloodline, seal the record, build the law on top of the grave. "She's been doing this the entire time," Zivah said. "Yes." "And your pack has been living inside it." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked back with the expression she had been watching develop across 6 days. The face of a man dismantling a structure he was raised inside, brick by brick, in real time. She pushed another document across the table. He took it. Their fingers were on opposite ends of the same page for exactly 2 seconds. She pulled back. He read. Outside his quarters, the compound moved into the pre-dawn hour. Below them, in the sealed chamber, the gold light of the carved walls held its frequency. Waiting. As it had always been waiting. As it would continue to wait until the work on this table was finished, and the thing it had been waiting for was finally, after 300 years, allowed to be what it was. Chapter 8. Vale moved at dawn. Not with noise, not with the blunt force of someone who needed volume to assert authority. She moved the way she had been moving for 300 years, through procedure, through the legitimate mechanism of pack law, through the structural architecture she had spent centuries making herself indispensable to. The summons reached Ravik at 6 a.m. A single folded document slid under his quarters door. He picked it up, read it once, set it on the table beside the founding documents they had worked through until 4:15. Zivah watched his face. "Emergency elder session," he said, "called under Article 17. "What's Article 17? "Alpha Conduct Review." He set the document down with the care of someone handling something that requires steadiness. "It allows the Elder Council to temporarily suspend Alpha authority during a credible threat to pack stability." She looked at the document. "She's moving now because of last night," Zivah said. "Because of the chamber," he said. "Corvin wasn't the only one who noticed." He went alone. She did not argue. She understood the geometry of it. The way her presence in that session would hand Vale exactly the visual evidence she needed to make the conduct review irrefutable. She stayed in his quarters with the founding documents and her recordings, and the transaction record with Vale's original name on it, and she listened to the compound sounds and counted the minutes. 47 minutes. He came back through the door, and she knew before he spoke. His face had not changed. That was how she knew. A man whose face had not changed, because changing it would cost him something he needed to conserve for what came next. "Article 17 passed," he said, 3-1. 72 hours. "Yes." "Thresh has interim authority." "Yes." She stood. "His first order," she said. It was not a question. "Has not been issued yet." Ravik crossed to the table, began stacking the founding documents with precise, controlled movements. "It will come within the hour." She watched his hands on the documents. "You need to not be here when it does," he said. "Where do I go?" He looked up. "Nowhere in this compound is outside Thresh's authority for the next 72 hours. A pause. "Which is what Vale designed." She held his gaze. "The evidence," she said, "is here, safe. Vale cannot access my quarters without Alpha authorization, and for 72 hours I am." He stopped, a muscle in his jaw. "She cannot access it." "But you can't use it." "Not for 72 hours. She looked at the stack of documents. 18 months of her work, 300 years of his family's suppressed record, the transaction document with Vale's original name. "She's going to move against the evidence," Zivah said. "She's not going to wait 72 hours. "I know." "Ravik." "I know." His voice was quiet, the quietest she had heard it. I have one move. He looked at her. I need you to trust it. She waited. He said nothing else. She understood not what the move was, but the shape of the ask. The specific quality of a request made by someone who has never asked for this particular thing before and is aware of what it costs to ask it. She breathed in. All right, she said. The first hour of Thresh's interim authority produced 3 orders in quick succession, delivered through the compound's command structure, with the efficiency of someone implementing a plan that had been ready and waiting. Order 1. All non-pack individuals held within Ashen Rift territory to be transferred to Deep Cell Holding. Order 2. Founding document archive to be placed under Elder Seal, inaccessible without council majority vote. Order 3. Blood trial proceeding for the individual classified as external threat to commence within 4 hours. The blood trial. Corvin heard the third order delivered in the command center and stood very still for 60 seconds. Then he walked to the western corridor, took the maintenance access to the residential level, and stood outside Ravik's quarters door. He did not knock. He stood there. Inside, Ravik heard him breathing. He crossed to the door, opened it. They looked at each other. Corvin said, "The blood trial will destroy whatever she is before anyone sees it." "I know. You have 72 hours of no authority." "I know." Corvin looked at him for a long moment. 16 years of working beside this man. 16 years of watching him carry the title like a physical weight, no complaint, no transfer of burden, no moment of asking someone else to hold it. Corvin reached into his jacket. He produced a key. He set it on the door frame between them. He turned and walked away down the corridor without looking back. Ravik looked at the key. He picked it up. Zivah heard the deep cell door before she saw him. She had been placed in holding 40 minutes after Thresh's first order, 2 wolves, the same careful blankness as the assembly guards, the same geometry of positioning that made choice irrelevant. The deep cells were 3 levels below the compound's operational floor, carved from the mountain's oldest rock, the walls so thick that the compound sounds above were completely absent. Silence, true silence, the kind that pressed against the ears. She sat on the stone bench and held her wrist and breathed. She was calculating, running the evidence timeline, the 72-hour window, the founding document access, Corvin's awareness of the situation, building contingencies, identifying the points where each contingency failed and what came after the failure. The blood trial order had reached her via the guard's murmured exchange outside her cell. 4 hours. She had 3 hours and 40 minutes remaining. She was still calculating when the lock turned. Not a guard. The sound was different. A single key, one mechanism, none of the procedural sequence of a sanctioned cell opening. The door opened. Ravik. No jacket. The state of his shirt was the same as the night of the assault, not disheveled, never disheveled, but stripped of the formal layer. He stood in the doorway and looked at her on the bench. "You have no authority for 72 hours, she said. "Correct. This is a direct violation of Thresh's interim order." "Also correct." She stood. "The evidence," she said, "is moved. Corvin has it in a location outside the archive seal's jurisdiction." He looked at her steadily. "We have everything. We simply cannot move until the 72 hours expire or until we have grounds to challenge the Article 17 invocation directly." "What grounds would challenge it?" "Evidence that the invocation itself was fraudulent, that the threat to pack stability Vale cited was manufactured rather than genuine." She looked at him. "The preposition rockfall," she said. "The assault on Ashen Rift last night was coordinated with internal cooperation," he said. "Someone in this compound provided the hollowed pack with structural access and timing. That constitutes elder misconduct under founding law, which supersedes Article 17. You can prove it. With your recordings and the transaction record, yes." A pause. But I need 2 hours and access to the pack link to present it to the full assembly simultaneously. If Vale can interrupt the presentation before it's complete. She will. Yes. They looked at each other in the deep cell silence. Then we need to move now, she said. Yes. She crossed to the door. He stepped aside. She moved through the doorway and he fell in beside her, and they walked the deep cell corridor together. No pretense of escort, no geometry of guarded and guard. Side by side. They reached the deep cell processing room at the same moment Thresh's order was being implemented. 4 wolves. The trial instruments on the stone table, old, precise, built for a purpose that had not been used in 6 generations. One of Thresh's appointed seconds reading the classification order aloud to the empty room. He stopped reading when Ravik walked in. The room went completely still. Ravik did not announce himself, did not speak. He walked to the stone table and placed himself between Zivah and the instruments and stood there. The 4 wolves looked at him. He looked back. His left sleeve had ridden up. The ash mark blazed on his wrist, fully black at the center, the edges burning gold, the most visible it had been since the night in the chamber. No way to miss it, no way to misread it. Thresh's second said, Alpha Ashborn, you are under Article 17 restriction. You have no authority. I have my body, Ravik said, which I am placing between this proceeding and its intended subject. A pause. You will have to move it. The room held its breath. She moved without deciding to. She crossed to him and took his hand. Not carefully, not with any awareness of the gesture's weight, her right hand finding his left, the marks on both their wrists pressing together, the contact completing a circuit that had been building since the interrogation room 6 days ago. The gold light was visible. Not from the walls, from the marks themselves, a warm, deep gold moving between their pressed wrists like water finding its level. Not gray, not the burning black of a bond under strain. Gold. Settled. Complete. One of the 4 wolves made a sound she had no word for. Then he went to one knee. Then the wolf beside him. Then the third. Thresh's second stood for 4 seconds longer than the others, his face moving through a sequence of expressions that ended somewhere between awe and the specific undoing of a man whose certainties have just been structurally removed. He knelt. Corvin appeared in the doorway. He looked at the 4 wolves on their knees, at the gold light between the 2 marks, at Ravik's face and then at hers. He said quietly, to no one specifically, that is not a bond forming. A pause. That is a bond completing. The deep cell silence held them all. Above them, through 3 levels of ancient rock, the compound continued its day, unaware. Operational, 340 wolves moving through their hours inside a history that was about to be irrevocably rewritten. Below, in the oldest chamber, the carved walls blazed gold. Steady. Certain. Waiting for the next move. Chapter 9. The completed bond moved through the pack link like a stone dropped into still water. Every wolf in Ashen Rift felt it simultaneously, in the base of the skull, in the chest, in the specific frequency that lived below conscious thought and above instinct. 340 wolves stopping mid-motion, mid-conversation, mid-sleep in the residential levels. A frequency they had forgotten they could receive. Something ancient, something that predated the compound, the law, the 300 years of careful falsification built on top of a grave. Rightness. The word was not a word. It had no language. It arrived as pure sensation, the specific cellular recognition of a system returning to its original calibration after 3 centuries of operating slightly, persistently wrong. Zivah felt it move out from their joined wrists, and she stood very still and let it go. Vale felt it in the council chamber. She was standing at the founding wall, the wall that bore the Silence Covenant's blood inscription, 300 years of her own carefully maintained work pressed into the stone in the language she had invented to make it permanent. The frequency hit her like cold water. She put both hands on the covenant inscription. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, her expression had settled into something that was not quite fear and not quite anger. The face of someone who has run a calculation and arrived at a number they do not accept. She began the invocation. Corvin reached them in the deep cell corridor, 30 seconds after the packlink pulse. She started the ritual, he said. He was already moving. Council chamber, we have minutes. Zivah looked at Ravik. He looked at her. Something passed between them in the silence. Not the bond, not the gold light, something more specific than either. The particular exchange of two people who have been building toward a single point and have arrived at it and must now decide who walks through first. She turned to Corvin. How long does the full invocation take? For a standard bond inversion, 4 minutes. For a completed bond, he paused. Less. She looked at Ravik. The Covenant's inversion clause, she said. Walk me through the exact condition. The target Luna must not have claimed her power, he said. If she has, if the power has been activated and owned, not just present but consciously held, the clause has no jurisdiction. A pause. Vale wrote it to destroy a bloodline that never knew what it carried. She did not write a contingency for the bloodline arriving informed. Zivah looked at her hands. She thought about the eastern wall. The way the stone had dissolved, not explosively, not with effort, but with the specific ease of a lock opening for the correct key. The way it had felt like remembering rather than discovering. The way her palms had known exactly what pressure to apply and where. She had not claimed it. She had used it, twice, instinctively, reactively, without understanding or intention. Using a thing was not claiming it. She understood the difference. How do I claim it? She said. Corvin looked at Ravik. Ravik looked at her. I don't know, he said. The appendix describes the ability, it doesn't describe the claiming. A pause. I think, he stopped. Say it, she said. I think it requires you to choose it, he said. Not in response to something, not because a wall needs opening or a threat needs stopping. His eyes held hers. Deliberately, knowing what you are and deciding to be it. The deep cell corridor was very quiet. She breathed in. She looked at her left wrist. At the mark, gold now, fully gold, the gray and black burned away entirely. The founding Luna's signature in her skin, 300 years old, carried through 6 generations of people who hid it and survived so she could stand in this corridor and decide. Her parents had spent 22 years keeping her ordinary. So that knowing would not break her before she could use it. She looked up. Go, she said to Corvin. Get the founding documents to the packlink access point. When the assembly convenes, they need to receive the evidence simultaneously with what happens in the council chamber. Corvin looked at Ravik. Ravik said, Go. Corvin went. She turned to Ravik. I'm going in alone, she said. His jaw held its line. No. She needs to finish the invocation, Zivah said. If you interrupt it before completion, she can invoke emergency elder powers and seal the founding documents under a security classification that takes months to challenge. A pause. She needs to complete the ritual, against me, and it needs to fail visibly. She looked at him. In front of witnesses. The chamber will have her wolves. The chamber will have 4 council members and whatever personal guard she's brought. She held his gaze. The packlink is active. When this happens, every wolf in Ashen Rift receives it simultaneously. He looked at her. She looked back. Zivah, her name in his mouth, the first time he had used it directly, without title, without the careful management of distance. It landed in her chest and stayed. I know what I'm doing, she said. I know you do. A pause. That's not what I was going to say. She waited. He crossed the 2 feet of corridor between them and put his hand against the side of her face. One moment, his thumb at her cheekbone, his palm against her jaw, the mark on his wrist blazing against her skin. One moment. Then he stepped back. Go, he said. I'll be at the chamber door. She went. The council chamber doors were open. Vale had not closed them. She stood at the founding wall with both palms pressed to the covenant inscription, her lips moving in the invocation's cadence, the air in the chamber carrying the specific charge of old power being activated. 2 of her personal guards stood at the chamber's far wall. Thresh sat in his council seat, watching. Zivah walked in. Vale did not stop. She walked to the center of the chamber floor, the same position as the assembly, the same stone beneath her feet, the same curved tiers of empty seats rising on 3 sides. She stood where the assembly had looked at her and decided what she was. She stood there now and decided for herself. Vale's invocation was 3/4 complete. The covenant inscription on the wall had begun to glow, not gold, nothing like gold. A deep, cold crimson that moved through the carved letters like blood finding channels. Zivah looked at her hands. She thought about her mother in the kitchen, 22 years of ordinary life built with both hands, every careful choice made to keep her daughter alive long enough. She thought about her father's handwriting on a single sheet of paper. Duskmoor, 1 word. A direction, not a warning. Here, go here, when you're ready. She thought about a chamber 3 levels, underground with walls, that had been waiting 300 years for her palms. She raised her hands. She did not think about the wall, did not think about the threat, the ritual, the crimson light crawling across the covenant inscription. She thought about the spiral on her wrist, gold and steady, and 300 years old in hers. Hers. She chose it. Not reactively, not in response. Deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was choosing and what it had cost the people before her to carry it this far. The ash flare ignited. Not the burst of the eastern wall, not the reactive heat of the parking garage or the nightmare. This was controlled, precise, and architectural, moving from her palms outward like light finding its correct wavelength. Gold. It crossed the chamber floor in the time it took Vale to turn around. Vale turned. She looked at Zivah's hands. Something moved across her face. Not fear exactly. The specific expression of a woman who has written a law with 1 gap in it and is looking directly at the gap. The invocation is complete, Vale said. Her voice was steady. The inversion requires a Luna who has not claimed her power, Zivah said. Silence. I have claimed it, Zivah said. She raised both hands toward the founding wall. The ash flare touched the covenant inscription. The crimson light fought it, 300 years of Vale's work, sustained and maintained and fed by stolen power, resisting with everything it had been built to resist. The chamber shook. The stone walls held. The ash spiral carvings along the arch began to glow gold in response, the older inscription waking, the original frequency of this chamber reasserting itself against the 3-century intrusion. Zivah did not force it. She did not push. She held her palms steady and let the ash flare do what founding Luna power had always been built to do, not destroy, not overwrite. Restore. The covenant inscription burned. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, 300 years of bloodwriting dissolving from the stone like frost from a window in morning light, not violently, not with the drama of destruction, but with the quiet irreversibility of something returning to its natural state. Through the pack link, every wolf in Ashen Rift watched it happen. Corvin had reached the access point. The founding documents were transmitting, every falsified record, every suppressed appendix, every marginal notation in the alphaline language, arriving simultaneously in the packlink's shared frequency alongside the visual of what was happening in the council chamber. 340 wolves, receiving 300 years of truth at the same moment. Vale's power extinguished. Not dramatically, not with noise or light or the theatrical collapse of something cinematic. It simply stopped, the way a fire stops when its fuel source is removed. The warmth of it gone from the room in an instant, leaving something cold and very old in its place. Vale's hands dropped from the wall. She turned. She looked at her hands. She had been 31 years old when she killed Kasha Vane. She had borrowed 3 centuries from a dead woman's power source and built a civilization on top of the lone. The loan was called. The years arrived. Not all at once, not the dramatic Hollywood collapse of a face crumbling in seconds. Slowly, irreversibly, the way debt settles when it finally comes due, the accumulated interest of 300 years of borrowed time redistributing itself across a body that was always going to have to pay it. She sat down. Not fell. Sat, a controlled lowering, the last act of a woman who had been in command of every room she had ever entered and was not going to surrender even this. She was old. Finally, completely, exactly as old as she was. Thresh stood. He looked at the wall, at the blank stone where the covenant had been, at Zivah's hands, the ash flare settling back into her palms like light returning to its source. He looked at Vale. He sat back down. I surrender the interim authority, he said, to no one specifically, to the room, to the pack link that was carrying this to every wolf in Ashen Rift simultaneously. Ravik was through the chamber doors before Thresh finished the sentence. He crossed the floor without looking at the council seats. He did not look at Thresh. He did not look at Vale in her chair, reduced and ancient and finally finished. He looked at Zivah. She was standing in the center of the chamber with her hands at her sides, and the ash flare gone and the gold mark on her wrist steady and warm. She was looking at the blank wall where the covenant had been. She was not celebrating. He stopped beside her. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that their arms nearly met and looked at the same wall she was looking at. It's done, he said. Marin and Thresh, she said. The pack needs a formal. I know. The founding record needs to be publicly. I know, a pause. Zivah. She turned her head. He was looking at her with the expression that had been building since the interrogation room. The face of a man who has spent 6 days dismantling his own walls and has arrived, finally, at the last one. The list, he said, the other 12 names. She waited. We have work to do, he said. She looked at him. We. The word sat between them with its full weight. She breathed in. Through the pack link, 340 wolves felt their alpha reclaim his authority, felt it settle back into the frequency like a voice returning to a chord that had been missing it, felt the ancient rightness of the completed bond running alongside it, different from anything pack law had described, older than the law itself. Several of them did not understand what they were feeling. All of them knew it was correct. Corvin appeared in the chamber doorway. He looked at the blank wall, at Vale in her chair, at the 2 people standing in the center of the chamber floor, not quite touching and not quite separate. He said nothing. He simply stood in the doorway and held the space open. Ravik looked at Thresh. Elder Thresh, he said, you will remain in the compound pending formal review under Founding Law Article 1. A pause. You will be treated with the dignity of your position until that review concludes. Thresh looked at him. And Vale, he said. Ravik looked at her in the chair, at the 300 years finally, visibly on her face. She stays where she is, he said, until she decides otherwise. He turned. He walked toward the chamber doors. Zivah fell in beside him. Not behind, not escorted. Beside. The compound waited beyond the doors. 340 wolves carrying new information. 300 years of corrected history. The specific disorientation of a population whose foundational story has just been rewritten in real time. She thought about her parents. She thought about the kitchen, the Tuesday in November, the single sheet of paper with one word on it, her father's handwriting steady and deliberate. Here. She was here. Through the doors. The compound opened around them. Noise, movement, the first voices calling for the alpha, the first wolves turning to see him emerge from the chamber with the mark on his wrist blazing gold, and the woman beside him whose wrist matched it. The first wolf who saw them stopped walking. Dropped to one knee. Then another. Then the corridor, one by one, in the specific cascade of a population recognizing something it did not have words for yet. Ravik walked through it without stopping. She walked beside him. The blank wall at her back. The list in her head. 12 names remaining. And for the first time since a kitchen in November, something that was not grief occupying the same space as the mission. She did not name it. She walked forward. Chapter 10. She asked for one night. No explanation, no context. She turned to Ravik in the corridor while the compound reorganized itself around the weight of everything that had just changed, and she said, "One night, alone." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "All right." No condition, no question, no performance of understanding, just the word, clean and immediate, the answer of a man who had decided somewhere in the last 6 days to simply give her what she asked for without making her justify the asking. She walked away from the compound noise and downward. The old chamber was unchanged. The rock fall at the eastern entrance had been cleared during the assault recovery, someone on Corvin's instruction, she suspected, the kind of quiet operational act that happened around Corvin without ever being directly attributable to him. The entrance stood open. The tunnel beyond it was dark. She walked through without hesitating. The gold light met her at the threshold. Not dramatically, not the blazing response of her first entry during the assault, not the ignition of contact and crisis. Steady, ambient, the walls doing what they had always done in this room, the ash spiral carvings holding their 300-year frequency, patient and continuous and entirely unconcerned with the urgency of the world above. She crossed to the far wall. She sat on the floor with her back against the stone, and her legs drawn up and her left wrist resting on her knee. The mark was gold. Fully, completely gold, the gray gone, the burning black gone, the desperate heat of a bond straining against resistance gone. What remained was warm and steady and quiet. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about her mother first. Lena Crane, who had been born Lena Vainkorath and had shed the name like a skin, and rebuilt herself in the flat middle of an ordinary American town with deliberate, loving thoroughness. Who had made school lunches and attended parent evenings, and kept a kitchen that smelled of coffee and warmth, and had done all of it, every single ordinary day of it, as an act of protection so complete it looked like nothing from the outside. She thought about her mother's hands, the specific way she held things, cups, books, Zivah's face when she was small and had scraped a knee or had a nightmare. The steadiness of those hands. The steadiness she had always thought was simply her mother's nature and understood now as the steadiness of someone carrying something enormous and choosing, every day, not to put it down. She thought about the mark on her own wrist and what it had cost her mother to look at it every day and say nothing. She knew Zivah thought, she always knew. The gold light breathed around her. She thought about her father. Korath Crane, who read slowly and laughed easily and fixed things with his hands, the specific competence of him, the way no object in their house had ever stayed broken for more than a day. Who had kept a locked desk drawer in a house with no other locked things, the single anomaly in a life built to contain no anomalies. A single sheet of paper, one word. Duskmoor. Not a warning, a direction, written by a man who knew, with the calm certainty of someone who had made his peace with a thing, that his daughter would eventually be ready to follow it. Written and locked away and left there like a gift with a future opening date. When you're ready. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. The grief was not new. She had been carrying it for 18 months, had built her entire forward momentum around it, had used it as fuel with the cold efficiency of someone who understood that grief is only destructive if you let it be purposeless. But this was different. This was the grief that lives on the other side of understanding. The grief that arrives when you know not just that you lost someone, but exactly what they were doing when you lost them, and what it cost them, and that they would do it again without question. She sat with it. She did not move through it, did not use it, did not file it under mission fuel or forward momentum or any of the categories she had built to make loss functional. She sat with it the way her mother had sat with her when she was small and frightened, without trying to resolve it. Just present, just there. The gold light held the chamber. The ash spirals on the walls held their frequency. 300 years of her bloodline's signature surrounding her in the oldest room in Ashen Rift. And for the first time since she had crossed the border, she did not feel like an intruder in it. She thought about Luna Kasha Vane. 26 years old, pressed palm to founding stone, did not know what she was feeding. Zivah looked at the carved spirals. She had thought about Kasha in abstract terms since Appendix 4 as a historical figure, a bloodline origin, the name at the beginning of the erasure chain. A woman whose death had set 300 years of consequence in motion. Sitting in this room, in the light that had been waiting since before Zivah's parents were born, she thought about her differently. 26 years old, 2 years older than Zivah was now, building something from nothing in these mountains with a man she loved who was not built for softness, making him capable of it anyway. Writing a covenant in her own blood because she was told it was tradition and had not yet learned that traditions can be invented by people with reasons. She had not known. Zivah had known. She had walked in with 18 months of intelligence and a list and her eyes open. She had crossed the border with full awareness that she was walking into something she might not walk out of. Kasha had walked in trusting. And she had still, from the chamber floor with everything taken from her, found the certainty to say, this does not end here. 300 years. 6 generations of bloodline carried underground, renamed, hidden in ordinary lives, sustained by people who loved each other and kept their children alive, and left them directions when they could not leave them explanations. This does not end here. Zivah pressed her marked wrist flat against the nearest spiral. The gold flared, warm, immediate, the specific resonance of a frequency recognizing itself. Not the ash flare, not power activating or claiming or demonstrating itself. Something quieter. Recognition. Like coming back to a place you left before you were old enough to remember leaving. She held it there. She breathed. She stayed in the chamber until the grief and the gold and the 300 years of waiting had settled into something she could carry forward. Not lighter, not resolved, not the clean emotional conclusion of a story reaching its final page. Heavier, actually, more fully weighted, the weight of knowing everything it had cost and choosing to carry it anyway. That was the difference between being given something and remembering it. She came up in the morning. The compound had moved into its day cycle, the cooler light, the layered sound of 340 wolves building their first morning inside a corrected history. She could hear the difference in it. Difficult to name, easy to feel, the specific quality of a community that had been handed an enormous truth the night before and was in the process of deciding what to build on it. She walked through the residential corridor, through the main junction, into the compound's central hall. He was on the floor. Not at the alpha seat, not at the elevated position at the hall's far end, where she had seen him take back his authority the night before. On the floor, back against the wall below the seat, legs stretched out, in the specific posture of someone who has been sitting in one place for long enough that formality has simply ceased to be sustainable. 2 cups on the stone beside him. Cold, she knew before she reached him. Cold for hours, the cups had been brought at some point in the night, and he had not touched them, and the compound had moved around him and he had stayed. Waiting without requiring anything from the waiting. She crossed the hall. She sat down beside him. Not across, not in the position of 2 people conducting a conversation across a managed distance. Beside, her shoulders 6 inches from his, her back against the same wall, her legs stretched out the same way. He did not speak. She did not speak. The hall moved around them. Wolves passing through, glancing over, some with the specific deference of people who had knelt in corridors the night before and were still recalibrating what that meant. Most simply moving through their morning, giving the 2 figures against the wall the unspoken courtesy of unremarked space. Corvin passed through once. He looked at them, at the 6 inches of space, at the 2 cold cups. He kept walking. The silence between her and Ravik had a different quality than all the silences before it, not loaded, not managed, not the carefully maintained distance of two people who are aware of exactly how much they are not saying. This silence was simply silence. The specific quiet of two people who have run out of things to withhold from each other and have arrived, exhausted and gold-marked and still, at the place where nothing needs to be performed. She looked at the hall. He looked at the hall. She said, "I still have 12 names on the list after Vale and Thresh." He said, "Then we have work to do." She turned her head. He turned his. "Oui," she said. He met her eyes. "Oui," he said. The word had a different weight than it had carried 6 days ago in the interrogation room, different even than it had carried in the council chamber last night. Stripped of strategy, stripped of mission architecture, stripped of everything except its simple, irrevocable meaning. "Oui." Through the pack link, 340 wolves felt something shift. Not power, not the formal frequency of alpha authority reasserting itself. Something older than authority and quieter than power. The specific resonance of a system returning to the calibration it was built for after 3 centuries of running slightly, persistently wrong. Rightness. Several wolves stopped what they were doing. Some without knowing why. She turned back to the hall. He turned back to the hall. 6 inches of space between them, and neither of them moved to close it, and neither of them moved to increase it, and the 6 inches was not distance anymore. It was simply where they were. Her left wrist rested on her knee between them. The mark was gold. Warm. Steady. Not burning. The desperate heat of a bond straining against obstacle was gone. The blazing of proximity and resistance, and everything they had not said was gone. What remained was something she did not have a word for in any language she had been raised to speak. She thought about her parents in their kitchen, the warmth of it, the ordinary, extraordinary dailiness of 2 people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other through 22 years of a life built carefully in the middle of something enormous. This, she thought, this is what they were protecting space for. She did not say it. She did not need to. Beside her, Ravik's left hand rested on the stone floor between them. His mark gold. Steady. Home. The hall moved through its mourning. The list had 12 names. The founding record was being rewritten. The blank wall in the council chamber waited to receive what would be carved there next. Not Vale's 300-year lie, not a law built on a grave, but whatever came after the truth, written by people who knew the full cost of the words they were pressing into stone. She would help write it. She knew that now. Not because she had been claimed or chosen or elevated. Not because a bond had completed or a mark had turned gold or a chamber had blazed in recognition of her bloodline. Because she had come to this mountain carrying her parents' names and a list and nothing left to lose. And she had found, in the oldest room in Ashen Rift, that loss was not what she had thought it was. It was not the end of a line. It was the place where the line turned. And kept going. She had come to Ashen Rift to finish something. She had not known, until she sat on the floor of a cold hall with a man who had waited all night with 2 cups of cold coffee, that she was also here to begin it.